Hello ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, and welcome back to another edition of videos. Today I wanted to show you another of my games against my good friend in real life, and as you're aware, we've been meeting up sort of once a week to practice a line, study a line for when we're going to go into sort of tournament chess. And this was another game that we played recently. We decided on going into a Sicilian defence and playing the canal attack, which is, I think, a really nice line for white. It offers nice calm positions. There are some really nice positional ideas with the pawn structures as well, and going into sort of things like Maroczy binds and whatnot. And as I'm kind of going to be doing another of my opening repertoire series, I thought it'd be good to have a look at the canal attack and actually practice it before I release that video. So this is what this game was all about. So we started e4, c5, and after d6, which is one of the main lines, here there's a really nice move that sort of avoids quite a lot of theory. Grandmasters have played it quite a lot. I mean, I'm just looking at the database now. There's nearly 20,000 games from this position, and it's the second most popular move. So generally you'll see d4 being played with the idea that you're giving up the central pawn, but you get a nice control of the centre. But with that said, Black often gets quite a lot of good counterplay. There's tons of different lines that you need to be aware of if you are going to play d4. So you've got to think about, things like the dragons, I guess the Naidorfs and stuff, the Kalishnikovs, and all those kind of lovely things to learn and play against. But instead of going into all those mainline theory and knowing all these things, I decided to play bishop b5, and this goes into what is known as the canal attack, also the Moscow variations. It's got two names. And the whole idea of this is I'm going to be looking in quite a lot of structures to exchange off this bishop, and as soon as I do that, I'm going to go for this Maroczy bind structure, and it's with an added advantage. Normally in the Maroczy bind, one of the problems that we have is what happens with this bishop. Because we're putting all our pawns onto light squares, this bishop is kind of a little bit hemmed in. So it can be a little bit difficult as to what we do with this bishop. Do we just let him sit there and play a defensive role for the whole game? So I guess this kind of, I suppose, what am I trying to say? I suppose it sort of avoids a lot of those problems straight away by getting rid of the bishop and then going for the Maroczy pawn. So we kind of get, I guess, a slightly improved version of it. So the main line goes bishop d7, which is what my opponent played, and after I captured, queen captures, I castled here. We just now develop, so I've got two plans here. I can either go for c3 followed by d4, or like in the game, I played d4, exchanged off the central pawn, and then went for c4. So we'll see how that operated. So first I played d4, we had an exchange. Now knight to f6 was played, and I've got two ways I can proceed here. Knight to c3 will look kind of quite reminiscent of a lot of other Sicilians, but instead I didn't want to play this because I can no longer play for this c4 idea. So instead I played rook to e1, which now defends the pawn. g6 was played. I now just played immediately c4 here and went into my Maroczy bind structure. And it's a really difficult structure to play against, particularly if you're as Black. And it's certainly, if you struggle against the Sicilian, knowing this pawn structure is definitely worth some investment in time. The whole idea is we are creating a bind on all the light squares, particularly this d5 square, and you'll notice that it is very hard for Black to try and break through. So he'd love to play this potential pawn break, but we've got so many pieces defending that square, it's in fact very difficult. Furthermore, another plan that you often see in a lot of Sicilians is this a6 followed by b5 idea. The problem is, with the pawn being on c4 and also the knight also helping support it, it's in fact very difficult for them to play that plan straight away. So that's why it's certainly a very topical move order to know about. When it first was, I guess, first played, I think in the 30s or the 20s by the theoreticians actually argued that this was a refutation to a lot of the Sicilians. But the good news is modern analysis and more modern play understood that actually black is not that much worse either. A lot of the times you'll find that black will need to just sit and be patient, and eventually he can hopefully get the counterplay that he wants to. Meanwhile, white on the other hand will be trying to hold the position as much as he can and try and suffocate black. So it's a very, very interesting game, and there's been a lot of analysis. I'll just show you there's a website you can go to, which we'll just have on the screen now, where it actually talks about this structure in a lot of depth and a lot of basically a lot of sort of theory, which is really interesting to have a look at. So if you've got time, I would definitely have a read of that to understand this pawn structure. Okay, so what happened in the game? So bishop g7 was played, and I played knight to c3, so now supporting my e4 pawn. Castles happened. I played f3, so now this helps support the e5, but also I'll be looking to play my bishop to e3, followed by maybe queen to d2, and then look to maybe exchange off this bishop. This bishop here is actually a very good key defensive piece in this sort of structure. The downside of this, though, is because black has got quite a space disadvantage in this structure, he actually wouldn't mind swapping off pieces. Typically, if black can exchange quite a few pieces off, because he's got the space disadvantage, he'll often be able to untangle out of a lot of his problems and should have a good endgame. Notice that black's pawn structure is very solid here, and white's pawn structure is a little bit too advanced, so it creates sort of weaknesses going into the endgame. So let's see how it goes. So a6 was played, then bishop e3. He played rook a to c8. I played b3 here now, so helping support this pawn on c5, and here, interestingly enough, black can actually get away with his counterplay now with the move b5, and it was something. Oh, sorry, actually I shouldn't say that. Captures first. Sorry, captures first after bishop here. Now b5, and this is quite interesting. So it's in fact it looks as though black has managed to carry out his plan on this side. So if I capture here, he can now start charging in with e5, and actually this knight is now being lost. So there's a few little tactics here, and furthermore, if I obviously do nothing, if let's say I just do a developing move like I don't know, let's say queen 2 here, he can capture this off, and he's created an isolated pawn. In fact, actually he just wins a pawn back after this, so I don't know if there's anything better here. b4, okay, so I could do that, but in actual fact, I am now down a pawn, so that's probably not a variation I would like to go into. So it's certainly very, very dangerous for me. So going back, what happened in the actual game? So after b3, he now played e6, which probably was a slight mistake in this variation. Obviously, we looked at the position. I guess this has the idea of stopping this knight from potentially coming to this nice d5 square. On d5, it controls the entire position, so certainly something I'd really want to try and get in at some point. I now played rook a to c8, so this gets it off this diagonal where it can potentially be under attack. And my opponent played queen to d8, which I guess kind of confused me at the time, but I had some ideas of maybe coming to these nice squares. It's probably slightly better placed than on the d7 square. So how did I continue? So I played queen to d2, so I'm getting ready this battery that I talked about. There was then a capture. I captured back with my bishop. And here, very unusually, my opponent played knight to h5, which I didn't really see as being a particularly good move, because it just allows me to capture this bishop without any loss of tempo. Notice if I do it the other way, I'd have to spend 2 moves just to remove the bishop, but here I only have to spend 1 move. So I was quite happy to see this. So I captured here, and my opponent captured with the king, which I didn't expect at all. I fully expected the knight coming here, and I guess this allows black to have some potential ideas with f4. So certainly not a bad idea at all. The problem though with f5 will be that he will need to find ways of supporting these central pawns if he does decide to go for that break. But instead my opponent just decided to play the king here instead. So I reached quite a critical point of the game in how I wanted to proceed. You know, I've got a nice space advantage. My pieces are nicely placed. So I first played rook e to d1. Yeah, I guess that's kind of better than the other rook. So I did that because that obviously now still defends this pawn. And I tried to create some pressure on this d6 pawn. Bear in mind, I'd love to move forward, but of course I'll be able to just sort of swap it off quite nicely. And it's a little bit difficult because I've still got to keep an eye on this knight. This knight could suddenly jump into the f4 square and create some problems for me. So now my opponent played queen to f6, so he was going for some complications here. So this now supports the knight coming to this square where he could potentially create some problems for me. And well, this is where things kind of went a little bit wrong in my position. You'll see here with the arrows, the engine loves knight to e2, and I think I would definitely get a nice edge out of that position. Another variation I did have a look at as well was just playing queen to d4. This just has the idea that if let's say there's a swap, I can take off. I'm still hitting this pawn here, and I can create quite a lot of pressure on this pawn. It's not so easy to defend this. If let's say he plays rook here, I can now just play e5, and well, this pawn is going to be quickly lost. So I'll just show an example. If there, we've got a nice intermezzo move with g4. So now this knight can no longer go to any square, so he just loses the knight straight away. So that's something he has to be very aware of. So here actually, in actual fact, they would have to try and break with the counterplay. Bear in mind, I'd love to capture here, but my knight would then fall. And after this, well, I will just take off here, and I am up a pawn. Okay, after a few exchanges, rook to c8. I do maintain the pawn, but it's not so easy for me to convert this. Okay, I've got a passed HA pawn here. The position, the rest of the pawn structure is all symmetrical, so I'll be certainly playing for the win here. But it's still definitely playable. It's certainly, if I wanted to try and grind a win, this would be the way to do it. Bear in mind as well, this knight needs to find some way of getting back into the position. I'll just be looking to, at some point, maybe reposition this knight somewhere better, maybe to e2 if I'm allowed to, which will then control the knights, and then look at ways of pushing this pawn. So it's certainly an interesting, but I think there are still drawing chances for black, although he'll be the one that won't be playing for a win anymore. So that was the other line that I considered. The best move was definitely knight to e2, and this just has a simple threat. Firstly, it controls this knight from coming into the game, but also there is another hidden threat, which is definitely the move g4. You saw on the other line, this knight has got no squares it can go to, so it can quickly be lost. So in actual fact here, my opponent would have to play a move like g5 just to save the knight. He could play, I guess, king to b8. Would that be an option as well? But I guess I just win the pawn, so I'm doing absolutely fine here. Let's just quickly see if, let's say, rook came here. Rook to b6. Okay, this looks all right for me. So I guess I just go up a pawn and I'm doing fine. So g5, and this has the idea of obviously creating an escape square for the knight. So queen to b4 would be the move to play, and now I'm ready to capture this pawn without the loss of tempo with the rook coming here. So that didn't happen in the game. Instead, I decided for whatever reason, and I think it's interesting, I didn't spend too much time on this game. I think I only spent up to 15 minutes for the whole game on my side up to this point. It was quite an easy position to sort of play to get the Maroczy, and I felt quite comfortable. But here I made a blunder. I say it's a blunder. I think, well, it's definitely a mistake anyway, put it this way. So I captured here on d6. Now the engine, it was already at this point showing about 1.6, so definitely up a pawn and a bit. And here it's just dead equal. And it's actually incredibly hard to get the equality, practically speaking. I don't know why I played like this. I think I was just thinking, oh, okay, I can go up a pawn here. My idea was obviously after this, I can move my queen back to here, which defends the knight, and I'm just up a pawn. The problem was, and what I missed, was this knight coming to f4 now. And this creates a lot of problems for me. Already he'll be threatening ideas like knight to e2. If he also exchanges off the rooks, let's say both rooks come off, this gives this square to the queen as well. And it just started to go really pear-shaped very quickly. So my opponent first played his rook over, and I played queen to b6. This is a mistake. Instead, sorry, queen to b4, which defends the knight. I should have actually been fine with this. I think the reason I played this was just to make sure. I was worried about if I played this way, I was worried about this move coming in, and obviously if I capture back, the queen captures here. But in actual fact, knight to d1 is fine. You'll notice here that this queen defends the key dark squares that the queen could potentially come in to cause some problems. So after maybe, let's say, a move like rook to d8, queen to e3, I think I'm doing fine here. I can now reposition the knight here, but it's certainly not as nice a position as I did have. You'll notice here now that this knight can come into f4, and it's difficult for me. I have to say it's very difficult for me. He's already threatening to maybe come into d3 with the knight and just create some problems for me. I'm just interested to see what would happen after this move. Knight here. Oh, totally losing. So this is the problem. Ouch. So he's now threatening just to win the queen off. Some really interesting tactics there. So in actual fact, g3 would have to be played. The knight would jump in. Rook to c3. Now, knight can still come to f4. Really interesting. Why can't... Oh, I see. So the rook has this threat now. So if I do capture this way, it's still equal actually, so I think that's fine, but that's the idea. So it'd have to maybe come back here. There's actually a repeat of the position, interestingly enough, so that he could go for that line if he wanted to. So that didn't happen in the game, and instead I played this, and again this is another mistake. I thought this would be fine. It turns out this is just too difficult to defend. So now knight to f4, and already he's threatening to even, well, I think one idea is actually just to exchange off, I believe, and then throw in the knight check. Is that the right idea? Or even just this, and then the knight check. So yeah, he would win. He would be up a rook there. So that's the first problem for me. So I didn't like that prospect. In actual fact, it's recommending just coming with king to f1. That's what the engine is recommending. But of course, this allows this fork now happening, so it's no good at all. So how did I proceed? Well, instead I captured the rook off, trying to maybe, hopefully, delay the inevitable. The problem here is now he has got a winning continuation. So first I tried to swap off the rooks. He obliged. Queen came to d4. Notice now I've relinquished the defense of these dark squares. So that was why this queen idea was so vital. It controls these key dark squares. So now my knight came to f2. I thought I'd maybe held this position, but oh no, the queen came over to the a1 with check. There's nothing I can do here. I jumped with my knights. He captured off. Well, in actual fact, what happened in the actual game? So apologies for this. Came here. In actual fact, actually, I just decided to give him the checkmate here. The alternative was obviously after queen here, king to f2. This check comes in with the capture of the queen. In actual fact, it's declaring here checkmate in 7 here. So king here. In actual fact, I can toy with white even further by doing that, which is quite funny, but I think this would be probably the most human move of everything. And black is doing fine. Checkmate's not far away. In actual fact, it's still saying checkmate in 6 at this point. What an interesting game. So yeah, it's very interesting just seeing how my position can go horribly wrong after just the simple capture of a pawn. And I think the problem, what I underestimated the position of my opponents. I didn't realize his pieces got so much activity after this. Instead, I should have just focused on restricting my opponent's pieces and then maybe going for the pawn afterwards. But there we go. Such is life. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this analysis. I hope to provide some more over the next few days. But otherwise, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care.